and welcome to another episode of the Citizen Sit Down. We had the wonderful Paul Cowley come and speak to us this week and share a bit of his story. So this podcast episode, we have Paul and his wife Amanda, and they're going to be speaking a little bit more into that. Just quickly before we jump into it, Paul has a book called Thief, Prisoner, Soldier, Priest, and it is so great, and I would really recommend reading that if you would like to. You can grab there's a few signed copies at the coffee van, so if you'd like one of those, then you need to be quick. Otherwise, we'll leave the link to the Amazon link down below. Well, I hope you enjoy the podcast. Well, hello, Paul and Amanda. It is so great to have you with us. I have to say, I think this is our first podcast with two guests. So what a pleasure that it's you guys.
Thank you. It's great.
It's so great to have you guys. So, Paul, you shared a bit about your story this week. And so we just want to kind of dive deeper into that and get to know you guys a little bit better, but also just talk more about your story. Both of your stories. So I just want to start with kind of how you guys met and where that all started.
Well, we met. Short version is we met in Cyprus. I was in the army. I was running an adventure training centre on the one mountain that they've got there, Mount Troodos, and I was up there working with the military, doing adventure training, hill walking, climbing, map reading, expedition work, all that sort of stuff. And one day, while I was teaching some of the boys with a colleague of mine to abseil, to climb on a little rock face, I heard these. My friend said to me, my colleague was a corporal, said, "Boss, I can hear some women." And at the time, up there in Troodos, it was quite isolated. There wasn't a lot. And I said, "No, there's no women up here. It's probably sheep or goats you can hear." And he went, "No, boss, it's women. I can hear women." So we sort of abseiled down this little rock face and sat on two rocks with these two young women, one called Amanda and one called Christina.
Yeah, I was 21 at the time. I was an art student at Roehampton studying art and contemporary dance. And Paul was 29 and had quite a history with women, which I didn't know about at the time, obviously. But we sort of met, and I think within 24 hours we were pretty keen on each other. And so it was pretty quick, wasn't it? But we were in the most incredible place, and we have gone back time and time again to that area of Troodos, which is just truly beautiful. We've taken our daughter back there, we've taken our son there, we've shown them the rock where we met, and they're totally bored by it, but for us it's very romantic that we met in Cyprus, the island of love.
Oh.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So that's where we first encountered each other.
Oh, great. And Amanda, I know you shared a little bit in the book about how you grew up in a Christian family and kind of had moved away from that. And so, Paul's come home and said, "I want to go to church." And I just want to know, what's going on there for you and how that kind of shaped your relationship.
Yeah, I think I was quite petrified, I would say, because we had been living together for 8 years. Mm-hmm. I had left my Christian faith behind when I went to university. And I think for me, it just felt the constraints of the Christian faith, no sex before you're married, that sort of protocol, if you like. That's what I understood.
Yeah.
And that, in a sense, dominated my understanding of faith over everything else. So I sort of put it to one side and, went out into the world, went to Cyprus, met Paul, and we lived together for 8 years. And we had a great time. We had a good living, we had money, we had excitement, we travelled a lot, we had we had a house, we had a really nice life together. So I didn't really want God knocking on his door because I'd shut the door.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted, I was disturbed by it and quite threatened, I would say.
Yeah.
But he challenged me because that sense that, I think Paul said, I'm going to go on this journey with or without you. And I thought at the time, yeah, he means it, because I know his character. I've got to do this. And, I came back pretty quickly after Paul got touched by God. I came back about a week later, and I felt like I'd come home.
It was a bit
of amazing thing.
It was a bit of a mess actually, because I came into the kingdom kicking and screaming, and then I totally embraced it. I just knew this is what I had to do. So as Amanda said, we were living together, and it was just really tense, and I couldn't understand why it was tense, because I knew nothing. You know, almost an atheist for 40 years, and then so I knew nothing of it. So to me, everything was really exciting, and I couldn't understand why she wasn't excited.
Yeah.
Because I was like this Billy Graham character. Come on, Amanda, you don't know what. Come on, you know what it's like. I was like this. Everything was new and shiny, and Amanda was like, yeah, done that, been there, seen that. I've done all that stuff. I used to carry a candle and I thought, what's the matter with her? You know. So it was a bit tense. It really was a bit tense.
I came from a sort of high church, but it was charismatic. So I understood the workings of the Holy Spirit. I mean, I'd seen people experience God. I mean, I wasn't shocked by any of it. And I didn't really want God to get hold of Paul, because I think I had hold of Paul, you see.
Yeah. Yeah. And Paul, you've spoken quite openly about, I guess you could say, the breakdown of a few relationships in your life with your son and in previous marriages as well. And I just would love you to speak into a bit about how you got to the point of almost forgiving yourself as well, before you began to reconcile those relationships.
Goodness me, that's a really good question. I think that the hardest person to forgive is yourself. I mean, it's hard to forgive anybody. I think that is a hard call, but to forgive yourself is really difficult, and it took a long time. You know, like I mentioned in the book, it's 2 marriages, 2 divorces, and a lot of stuff in between, and my son. But when I became a Christian, all that didn't happen overnight, but God has a way of really sort of working with you and in you and prompting you, and then I don't know what anyone else's relationship with God is, but mine's this constant sort of banter with him. Do you really want me to do that? Why don't you try this? No, that's not going to work. And so that's the conversations I have with him, and over that time, he's brought about reconciliation. I've made my peace with both my ex-wives. We're okay there. My son coming back into my life, but the hardest part is what you said. When I became a Christian, in a way, I felt God said, we've got to start again, and you've got to like yourself, Paul. Because I don't really think I liked myself. Hence the escape to Cyprus. That's why I went there. Yeah. Because I was just overwhelmed with, relationships, failed relationships. My son, even though I didn't talk about it, there was a real guilt complex there. What I'd done, how I'd hurt people. So I just wanted to really run away from that. Like I mentioned last night in the talk, just run away from my responsibilities. And that's what my colonel in the military said. Well, I'll send you to Cyprus, to the Adventure Training Center, because there's nothing there.
Yeah.
And I think it was there that I started to make peace with myself. I think, not in a spiritual way, but in a physical way, just being out in the elements and away from all the distractions that got me into trouble. I think it started there. And then Amanda came along, and that relationship was different. There was something different about Amanda.
Yeah.
But I was still a big distraction. Because that lasted 8 years.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
And then he was my distraction. So in a way, although you started to change and we had a very, very
I think I found peace in the relationship, which I hadn't found because I wasn't at peace. It's not my 2 ex-wives' fault at all. They were amazing women, actually. They just met me at the wrong time, wrong place. And when I met Amanda, I was starting to change. So I had a peace in the relationship, if that's answering your question. I guess I started to feel comfortable with myself, that I can be faithful in a relationship. I'm enjoying this relationship. We get on well. Amanda's always been my friend, my colleague, my companion, all that stuff we did together. And I thought, oh, this is really interesting. It's just, to be honest, it's just not about sex. This is about a friendship and a relationship and a companion. And I think that's where the healing, if you want to use that word, started to take place over those 8 years. And God is I think he's very crafty, because in a way that was a warm up to me coming into the faith.
Yeah.
He had to get me somewhere before he could get me, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I love that has kind of like happened even before, you've taken that step in going to church.
Yeah.
And finding your faith in that sense. But how, in terms of like how your relationship was then shaped post your first church visit, as it were, how did you like comprehend, okay, well, we've been in this relationship for 8 years and we've been doing it our way. How do we now, 8 years is a long time to change, like routine, I guess, lifestyle of that relationship. How did you kind of, navigate that together?
Well, I was a bit brutal, that I guess that's my character. So, 17 years in the military. I'm used to sort of, and I suppose I am still a little bit, which doesn't always go down well in the Church of England. I'm a bit, I don't understand why we can't do it. Let's just do it and see if it works. And if it fails, we've learned, let's move on.
Yeah.
So I kind of came into the kingdom with that sort of attitude to faith. So to answer your question, we'd lived together, everything was established, we had a nice lifestyle, as Amanda's just said. And then I felt God prompting me. But he prompts in a gentle way. It's the way I explain it is not gentle. So it's not his fault.
Yeah.
So I remember saying to Amanda, we have to stop this sex thing, sleeping together. And Amanda can say what she wants to, but it was kind of, what? Because we'd established, we were
married in a sense.
8 years, There's a Joni Mitchell line in the song, where she says, we don't need some certificate from the city hall. We were married. Yeah. That was the end of it. So when I said, I think things have to change now, I've got God. Not God's fault, but I was using him as a weapon.
Yeah.
I said, we have to stop this sleeping together.
You felt convicted, didn't you?
I felt convicted. And I thought, then there was the whole, get a grip, Paul. Do you know what I mean? Talk about sexual relationships and your background. And now you're becoming all this like Billy Graham character.
Yeah.
And we had this... We had this funny moment where I felt God had convicted me that we should get married. But with my background, I'm not the best deal for marriage. But I was convicted, and I bought these two, unbeknownst to Amanda, I bought these 2 wedding rings from cheap wedding rings. And we went out for a coffee. And the way I remember it is we were sat having a coffee, and I pushed these 2 rings towards her on the table, and she looked at him and said, what are they for? I said, well, God's told me that we should get married. And Amanda kind of said, well, he hasn't told me. And we had this argument in this coffee shop, and Amanda left and went and stayed with her friend. I went back to our flat, and I opened a bottle of red wine, was getting pretty drunk, and I remember saying, this is not a good plan. I thought you told me to get married, and I'm on my own, and I'm drinking red wine. I'm in a flat on my own, and I'm back where I started. And what is going on? And it was kind of, you got the concept, but that's not the way I would have done it.
Yeah, I think we had spent 8 years saying we don't need a piece of paper from the city hall, aka Joni Mitchell, singing, and why are you suddenly putting this on me? Okay. So he'd had a God experience in the May. We'd both done the Alpha course. We'd both experienced the Holy Spirit. And I got it because I knew all the rules. So I knew what was coming in a way.
Yeah.
So the no sex was a bit of a shock. And I sort of, we're going to live together, stay in the same bed, but we're not going to have sex together. I mean, that seems a bit ridiculous. And Paul was like, that's how I feel. I feel like we need to have a gap so that I can realign myself with you in some way. And this was not coming. This is interesting because it was not coming from any church leadership at all.
Oh.
It wasn't. It was. I can honestly say it was not coming from any particular church leader at all. It was simply he felt convicted.
Because personally, my own opinion, I don't think that works. Because if someone had told me with my nature and my character, I'd have said basically on your bike. I'll do what I want to do. Who are you? But
Yeah.
when it came from God, it was, and now in retrospect, I know what he was doing. He was bringing me into the family. I was being grafted in, you know, because I believe whatever you've done, wherever you've been, you know, you come to Christ, you're forgiven.
Yeah.
That's what the scriptures say. So he was bringing me in and putting me into the place where he knew I'd feel comfortable with everything, and he was comfortable, but it was done differently. So for me, in that period of time, it wasn't a long
It's about
time,
4 months.
where we didn't sleep
We got
together
married.
at all, and then we got married, and we had a wedding night, which is the plan. I know we don't all get there, and I'm the one that's messed that up so many times, but it was a wedding night, like the plan is meant to be, and we all fail in that a lot of the time, but the plan is, we know the plan that God has for us. And we had that wedding, and we had that wedding night, and all the stuff and everything, and it was exciting, you know, it was really exciting, but God had to bring me in, and in those 3-4 months, I can honestly say I viewed Amanda in a very different way, and I think that's what God was doing. She became my mate, she became my friend, she became my colleague, you know, she became my partner, and eventually my wife, and my soulmate. And I can honestly say, and I'll be truthful with you, I didn't look at women like that before. I just couldn't, because of my background, my father, my grandfather, all that stuff. And in that time, God was, like I mentioned last night in the talk, he was realigning, you know, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, the scriptures say.
Yeah.
So it was a realignment. And if anyone's listening who's been through that, they know what it's like, and it's not easy. It's just everything has to sort of tilt and shift. And in those few months, where for me, we just didn't sleep together, because that was a boundary that I'd crossed, it changed things.
Yeah.
It really changed things and set us up. And that's what God does. He wants you to be set up not to fail. And for me, because we're all different, that's what he was doing in that area, because that was my tricky area, if I'm being very honest with you.
I think for me it was interesting, because I sort of felt rejected, if I'm honest. I sort of felt like, oh, so you don't want to sleep with me anymore, okay. And I even really didn't know until our wedding night whether we would have sex again. I mean, honestly, it was quite a bizarre time for both of us, I think, because it wasn't coming from leadership, and it wasn't something we were being preached about at all. But it just became this quite big thing for both of us. And
I had no scriptures on it. I had no knowledge of the Bible. There was no like, oh, it says this and it says that, and in this it says that. Well, I didn't know the Bible.
I sort of, it took me back to my late teens with this knowledge that that's what you didn't do, the ideal, and I questioned that. So this is no judgment on anybody else either, because one thing that Paul and I have often felt, you know, we've had people come to us and talk about this subject with us, but it's not about us imposing our values and our judgment on other people. It's about what happened to us. So, you know, on our wedding night, we just resumed our normal sexual activity, and it was fantastic. And I thought, oh, it is great, it is okay, it's fine. But to have that, I think I had to almost have a new sense of being with the Father. I actually had a dream as well, which was, I was lying on a beach in Tarifa in Spain, where Paul had been to Gibraltar for 3 years, and I'd been flying out to see him every 5 weeks. And in the dream, I woke up and I said, oh my goodness, you won't believe my dream. And he said, what happened? I said, Jesus walked out of the water, and we were both sunbathing, and he reached down and he said, are you coming with me? And I reached up and took his hand. He pulled me up and we walked into the water, and I woke up. And Paul looked at me and said,
Left me on the beach.
He said,
Left me on the beach. What's going on there?
Didn't you want to take me with you? I said, this wasn't about you, Paul. It was about me.
Yeah.
It was about me. And this was just before we got married. So I sort of felt the Lord was saying to me, are you going to come with me on your own? Is this something you can do with me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not about him. I'll put you two together, because the plan is you're going to do this life together, but are you choosing me over him? And I wanted to as well. That's what's so exciting. In the dream, I was like, yes, I'm coming with you. It was a beautiful dream.
That's what's exciting about faith, my faith, our faith, Christian faith, is that, you know, I think the Bible says somewhere that God is a jealous God, but jealous for us individually and wants us. And the irony is, you know, we struggle sometimes to surrender that, especially if we're in a relationship, especially if we're young and we're living together and everything is about us. Of course it is. and God says, I love you both, but I love you individually. And if you give me your heart, I'll give you so much back. And that's, I think, what's hard to understand unless you go through it. And it's really tricky.
And that's also what's very exciting about the Christian faith, because wherever you are in your life, whether you're 65, 95, 25, 17, wherever you are and whatever you've done, Christ can come in and take your hand and lead you into a new life and into fresh waters and give you the well-watered garden, you know. So we had a great garden before, we had a great life, but it lacked the magnificence of God. And so when we both, and you had a dream as well, didn't you, about following God? It was a different sort of, a different one, but very similar. And I think wherever we are, whatever we've done, whoever we've slept with, whatever, look at the prostitute, you know, Jesus leant down in the earth and wrote something. We're not sure exactly what he wrote. And he said, you who have done no wrong, you throw the first stone. And they couldn't. They couldn't do it. And so, you know, the woman who touches his garment, who's bled for 12 years, he says, your faith has healed you, go, you're healed. So he will embrace anybody at any stage.
It doesn't matter.
You don't have to be squeaky clean. And that's what I love about Jesus.
Yeah, I love, Paul, you shared about how when you had come to faith that God had prompted you to want to get married. And I just would love for you to give some advice on, you know, maybe there's somebody listening who, and it might not be in the same sense, but they've been in this situation before where they feel a bit stuck, not necessarily that they've failed, but that it hasn't quite worked out. And how do they get to that point where they have the courage to give it another go, where God says, I would like you to try this again, and they're like, oh gosh, like, you know, it hasn't worked out before, but I want to give it a go.
What a brilliant question. I mean, in a relationship or come out of been in a difficult relationship now on their own and scared to go back in?
I suppose in relationships or even, just in the everyday, like, you know, you can often fail at.
You could give the example of Phoebe, you know, about having another child because you felt you failed.
Let me answer it in a different way, because we're all unique. When we, you know, I had a son, Clinton, to my first marriage. And like I mentioned last night, you know, I left him at 3 and then saw him on and off, not really bothered, and then got him back, which was brilliant. So when me and Amanda became Christians, we started our life together, we got married and everything. Amanda never pressured me about children, but it was always bubbling away in the background, you know. Amanda's younger than me. And I was really nervous about having a child. Because obviously in my heart I'd messed that up. You know, I didn't do a very good job as a father. I tried, but I left him when he was 3, so that proves the point. So to have another child, you know, it was kind of no, not really, because I can't mess another kid's life up again and go through all that single parent stuff that I went through and put him or her through that. And I was really torn, and Amanda never pressured me, but I know she wanted a child. And for me, I had to really, you know, in some way it's funny, I had to seek counsel. I tried to see my vicar at the time, who was Sandy Miller, before Nicky Gumbel. And Sandy's been a mentor to me for years and still is. And I wanted to see him you know, he's the wise. I can ask him, and if he says yes, it's great. And if he says no, then... Anyway, I could never get to see him. For some reason, every time I tried, it was busy and everything. And Amanda was saying, well, we should just pray. And I said, no, I need someone to tell me. Anyway, eventually I got to him, and I spilled all this stuff out, and he went, oh, for goodness sake, Paul, just have a child. What's the matter with you? And
you'll be a great dad.
You'll be a great dad. And I also felt, and if this helps with relationship, I felt God say to me, if you let me do this with you, if we do this together, like I mentioned last night in the talk, the bit of paper and the plan, if we do this together this time, you've got to remember it's different now because you're with me.
Yeah.
And there may be some people listening who are saying, well, that's great, but it's messed up on I am a Christian, and he was with me, and it still went wrong. Well, then you have to seek counsel. In Proverbs, I think it says, plans fail through lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they are successful. And I think sometimes, especially for a man with my background, it's quite hard sometimes to open up and be vulnerable and ask for help. And I've learned to do that.
Yeah.
You can be vulnerable, but you need to choose who you're vulnerable with. As someone once said to me, you don't have to do all your dirty washing in public. You do it privately.
Yeah.
And I sought that for Phoebe, and we had a daughter, and she's 23, and she's extraordinary. And I might not have had her if I'd have locked myself down and said I can't be a good dad, or I can't be a good husband, or what's the point? I'll never be faithful in a relationship. If I'd have, like I mentioned last night, let my past dictate my future, I would never be in a relationship.
Yeah.
Because I would never have carried on with this, oh goodness me, she's lovely, she's nice, that ain't going to work because I know what I'm like. I would never be where I am now. I would never have gone on an alpha course.
Yeah.
I would never have a daughter. And I think if we let our past dictate our future, if we've had a failed relationship, we've had a failed relationship. If we're hurt, we're hurt. And that's painful. No one's knocking that. But if we close ourselves down, we will never move forward. And that's the sadness that I did for 40 years.
I think life is risk.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, it's a risk. Wherever you go, whatever you do, whoever you're with, it's a risk. And Jesus said, you will have troubles in this life, but I have overcome the world. So in other words, I think what he means by that is, you will have troubles, but I'll be there with you. I'll walk through it with you. So take the risk, step into something.
And trust me.
It's
trust.
If it goes wrong, because there are no guarantees in life for anybody.
Yeah.
If it goes wrong, are you trusting me? Are you absolutely trusting me with your life? Ultimately. And I think the main point I think is really important is what Paul said about counsel. And I think if you seek wise counsel, so through, just for instance, the reality of having a child, your second child, when you've gone through what Paul has gone through, so his upbringing, his marriage, his leaving Clinton when he was very little, re-establishing that relationship when he was older, when you've been through all those things, you can't help but take baggage into the next relationship, the next parenting. And so whenever we came up upon problems with Phoebe, where I would fundamentally disagree with my husband because I had a very different upbringing. So I would say to him, you don't do that with a child. You don't behave like that with a child. You don't have to do this. We can do that. Da-da. He'd say, well, I don't understand. Why are you saying this? That doesn't make sense to me. And we went and sought counsel. We went to Nikki and Silla Lee. I mean, we probably had the best marriage counselling we could get with those two. They were fantastic. And they'd say, no, we understand that, Paul, but actually now Phoebe's reached this age, you need to approach her like this. And so he was humble enough and loved his daughter enough and his wife enough to say, okay, I'm prepared to look at that. And sometimes I was wrong and I'd have to apologise to Paul. And
I think you were wrong more than me, I think.
Was I?
Just want to get that out.
So
but,
it's about seeking wise counsel. People you trust to say, I don't know what to do with this. We've both been in therapy at different times in our life. I've had therapy. Paul's had therapy. He's had trauma counselling. That's written about in the book as well. And I think it's an exciting thing to say. I can't do this
just
on
get
my
some
own.
help. Ask
Get
someone.
some help.
Get some help.
Yeah.
It's the most humbling thing and the advice I can ever give. Just seek some really wise counsel. They don't have to be Christians. Seek wise counsel who love you and have got your best interests and talk to them.
Or do a combination of counselling. If you are fearful of walking into a relationship because you were so damaged and hurt, then you need to offload that. You need to cast your cares onto Jesus because he loves you. But you might not know quite how to do that because your fundamental thing was lack of trust.
Yeah.
So you need to grow in that and get that excavated from yourself. And counselling's a very good way of doing it. So we're both absolutely, we promote counselling.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And something you mentioned briefly, Paul, was about your work with caring for ex-offenders, and I know it speaks about it in the book, about how people re-offend because they feel better, or they feel more at home in the chaplaincy in the prison. And so I just want you to kind of talk into, well, how do we create church as that home that shows so much? We're speaking about this culture point, love is our language. Like, how do we create somewhere that's so loving that these ex-offenders are just like, wow, okay, this is better, this is where I need to be, this is my home?
Well, the really simple answer is we need to love them. That's the easy answer to say that. Love is a concept of all sorts of things, which you were talking about last night in the service. But someone once said there's no excuse for crime, but there's many reasons for it. And when you unpack, not everyone, but 99.9% of men and women in prison, when you unpack their story, you'll see that there's been damage. It might be parental, it might be abuse, it might be physical, sexual, mental, or a combination of all of them. There's been some lack of trust, abuse, or something, failure in their background. And it's led them to a custodial sentence. So if they come to the knowledge of Christ, which so many people are now in prison, and Alpha in prisons is one of the main ways that's happening, which is fantastic, but there's other ways, of course there is. Once they find that love and trust of Christ in the chapel, in the prison, which many of them do, they feel settled. When they come out, the church has got to be there to meet them, to continue that journey that they've been on. And unfortunately, sometimes it isn't.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll come into a church, these men and women, and they might not look like your classic parishioner. There's lots of people I know with faces half tattooed. They don't look like your normal person in the Sunday church, but they love Christ. And they need to be embraced. And they're sometimes as scared as the church is of them. So you get this tension. I'm not sure what you're going to do because you don't look like everyone I normally do, and your background's a bit different. And they're not sure of me. Like I mentioned that story about Valjean in Les Miserables. Valjean wasn't sure about the bishop and the priest, and why are you loving me, and why are you being nice to me, and why are you not shouting at me, and because that's what I'm used to. So you get this tension. So that's why in the caring for ex-offenders that you mentioned, we do the training, because the church has to be trained how to look after someone coming out of prison. I don't care what church you are, you need some guidelines, because you're working with someone who's not sure of what you're doing, and this man or this woman, mostly men in prison, of most of their life have survived through manipulation and through surviving and through having to, because of what's happened into their lives and what they've done. So those are the parts that their brain is working on, and what we have to do is ask God to rewire the brain, like I was talking about. So we have to be at the epicenter of this work. We have to meet them before they're released, with volunteers going into the prison. We have to build that relationship. We have to meet them at the gate, because that's a trust thing. You said you'd be there. Are you going to be there? Because everyone's let me down. So why would you turn up? Hi, Bree, come on, we met in prison, and then we're meeting at the gate. Come on back, let's have some coffee and breakfast, and I'll introduce you to the team, and we've got a little structure for you, and we're going to love you, and this is what we'd want you to do. So it's about doing that and forming this relationship and building trust. And when that works, to sound cliched, it is such a beautiful thing, because these men and women have got so much to offer the church. They are on fire for Christ, because they come in without the spiritual baggage. They might have the life baggage, but they are so excited about this new faith they found. And if the church can embrace that through training and safeguarding and everything else, it's such a wonderful thing. But we have to build that trust and that relationship.
I think also I might want to say something about the reality of it as well, because some of the guys that are held, and the women, are unable to accept the help. So there can be times where you can plough a lot of energy into an ex-prison leaver, and they are unable to receive it generally because of the brokenness. And it's all too much, and they have to go back to the life they knew.
Yeah.
And that's very sad. And that's why, in a way, the training is very important, because it's not necessarily about what you have done or not done. It can be about a mindset. And so it's about working with someone for a very long time, inputting. And that's why boundaries are very important.
And constantly being there. We could talk for this forever, but someone comes out of prison, an example, someone came out of prison, we met them at the gate, we explained, done everything I've just told you that we do. And then they come and they reoffend and they go back in again, and then we meet them at the gate, and then they come back in again and they reoffend. And sometimes these men and women can't understand why you keep meeting them, because they keep messing up.
Yeah.
And this is not a short sprint. This is like, we'll meet you at the gate. And caring for ex-offenders, we'll meet people at the gate time and time again. And I've done it. Hi Jim, yep, I know, third time out. Come on, let's crack on. How many days last time? 10 days. Well, let's go for 12.
Stealing a parishioner's car.
Loads of things.
Taking it up the motorway, getting caught by the police back inside. I mean. And
then going to visit them, and then when you release, we'll meet you at the gate again. So, and that can be discouraging, not only for Fred or Mary, who's been released from prison, because they feel shame and sad. It's the pastor feels bad, because sometimes you can say, I failed you as well. So it's not just about you, it's about me.
Yeah.
So that's what the training and the counselling and all that stuff really helps the church. You can't do it on your own. We need help.
I mean, I could listen to you guys forever, and there is just so much we can unpack, but I just want to finish by asking, you have, obviously your story is just incredible, and the stuff that you can share with people in prison and on Alpha and in all sorts of places, I guess. But for somebody who wants to join a justice team or get involved in that sense, how do they, they might be thinking, well, my story is not like yours, I can't relate to them in that sense, but I want to get involved. What would your advice be to somebody who's, has that yearning to want to get involved, but is like, I'm not entirely sure if who I am can help in that sense?
You don't have to have a story like mine. I mean, the point is, as a Christian wanting to do this, then all you need to do is come into your church. If it's here, come into Citizen Church, talk to someone, talk to you, or talk to the team here about getting involved in social justice. It doesn't have to be prisons, can be anything.
Yeah.
Like we mentioned before we went on there, Matthew 25. I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was naked, I was a stranger, I was in prison, I was sick. That Matthew 25 is our corporal acts of mercy. And I believe we should get involved in one of them or all of them or whatever. It's not a tick list. But they are corporal acts of mercy. That's what God wants us to do. So come in and talk to somebody. Maybe go on a prison visit when we can. Go with a team and do an Alpha course in a prison, or talk to an ex-offender, or get involved, speak to a chaplain, or do something and just sort of take a foot forward in it. I've had loads of people say, I want to go into a prison, I want to do prison work, I feel God's called me to do it. Okay. Well, come in a prison visit, come and sit in a team, go through a course of Alpha. And then sometimes they said to me, do you know what, I don't want to do that. And I've gone, brilliant. Now you know what you don't want to do, which gives you an opportunity to see what you want to do. So you have this Matthew 25, and what you can do, you can start working your way through, and you can find out where God doesn't want you. And then eventually, like me, you'll find out where God wants you. But if you don't try them, you're not going to know that. So don't be fearful. Speak to someone and just ask.
Yeah, and I'd just really like to add to the fact that if you don't have a dramatic story and you were raised in a wonderful Christian family and nothing seriously has ever gone wrong with your life, then you have a gift. Because there are plenty of people who have had trauma and brokenness, especially in prison. So if you have had a steady life, then you have got something to offer. Don't think because you don't have the dramatic story, you have to create one.
No.
You have probably wisdom in all sorts of areas. You're probably very steady, all sorts of giftings, and that can be utilised within hospital,
and whatever age
anything.
you are as well. You know, I've had people say, you know, I've been a banker all my life, and now I'm 65 and I'm retired, and you know, I went to Eton, and you know, we're very, you know, and I go, well, come in. And I've seen those people who don't think they can go in talking to an offender in prison, having an amazing time, because what they represent is the uncles and the aunties and the granddads and the, you know, none of my history is like that. So for me to speak to someone like that, who's just had a normal upbringing, is extraordinary. And I've seen, you know, older generation, male and female, talking to a younger generation in prison, most are 27 to 34 years of age. And they're like grandfathers and grandmums, you know, that sort of things, grannies and uncles. Yeah. And there's such wisdom there, actually. So you don't have to have these dramatic stories at all, like Amanda said. And it doesn't matter if you're 18 or you're 79. It really doesn't matter. Just step out and experience it, and God will say, that's where I want you. Or I tell you what, why don't we just put you over here? And then you find your slot, and then that's when it gets exciting.
Well, thank you guys so much for your openness and your authenticity. I've loved chatting with you. And thanks for tuning in. And don't forget, if you want to go and watch Paul's talk, then we'll leave the link for that in the description, as well as a link to buy Paul's book if that's something you want to look at. Thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you soon.